Welcome to another podcast of the Outside Podcast, another episode of the Outside Podcast. We're going to have talking about some specific things today. Our topic of conversation today is going to come from Aaron. Aaron's going to be talking about a property opportunity called Lukens Island. So, Aaron, tell us a little bit about Lukens Island and what's going on there. What do you got for us?
Hey, thank you, Wayne. I appreciate it. Aaron Bumgarner, CEO and founder of Outside Incorporated. Outside is a company that started out identifying unique places to acquire, protect, and restore. Started out based in Richmond, Virginia. I split my time between Virginia and North Carolina, and now the company is based in Dubai, UAE. And so we essentially, pivoted to Web3 a couple of years ago, and essentially what we're doing is tokenizing these real land assets. And by tokenizing, what I mean is we essentially take these properties and wrap them in an entity, sometimes corporation, LLC, whatever may be the best fit. We're looking at Wyoming Dales, for example, has a potential strategy. And we take those and then we fractionalize them into essentially tokens. We'll essentially create millions of tokens for these assets and then launch them into Algorand, Ethereum, working with Mint Layer over in Dubai, which is a side chain to Bitcoin. Really looking forward to that partnership. And so one of our flagship properties that we're heavily focused on right now in North Carolina is in Carteret County, North Carolina. It's called Lukens Island. It's approximately about 7,500 acres. Predominantly forest land, has a 16 bedroom, I believe an 8-bath lodge on it, and 16 bedroom, 8-bath lodge on the waterfront pier. I think it has around 20 miles of beachfront, marsh waterways, marshfront, essentially 20 plus miles of waterfront on it. And it's in Carteret County, North Carolina, on the and what we, if you're from North Carolina, we kind of call that area the Inner Banks, is what we call it, because it's kind of on the inner side of the Outer Banks, just north of Beaufort, North Carolina. And so I've been working with the shareholders and owners of that property to essentially tokenize that property and essentially exit them out of the deal. And it's a property that is rich in outdoor recreation, hunting, fishing, mountain bike riding, horseback riding, equestrian opportunities. And what's most interesting about this property is it actually has a forest carbon sequestration deal on it currently that is positive cash flow on the property. And so we've put together some videos and photos of the property here very recently. We're really trying to push the marketing heavily on it so we can get it out there. And we have a token that's on Algorand and should be on Ethereum by tonight, actually. The token ticker symbol is OTSDLKNS for Outside Lukens. And so that's been a huge focus for the past couple of weeks, is working on that property. It's on the Neuse River in North Carolina, just kind of north of Morehead City and Beaufort, Harkers Island, across the water from Oriental, North Carolina. Very special area.
So what are the advantages of investing in a property like this in North Carolina versus, say, some other coastal property like Louisiana, Mississippi, Virginia, something like that? Is there
Well,
something unique to North Carolina?
yeah, for this particular property, there is. And there's, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Virginia, all these states are going to have unique assets. This just happens to be a really unique asset in North Carolina. The most interesting thing about this particular property, and at this stage before we are with the company, is identifying unique assets where you have what I would call a friendly buyer-seller relationship, where you have a buyer, a seller that is willing to try real-world assets, digital assets, tokenization, and and so in this case we have an incredibly unique asset with the lodge, with the ecosystem protection going on, the carbon sequestration, cash flowing revenue deal, all of that. But you have a willing seller that's willing to say, okay, I'll give this a try. And the way that came about, we've with Outside, we've been working on this property for about 2 years.
Okay.
First stepped onto the property October 2 years ago,
Okay.
and was really blown away by it. To find a property that is this size in one contiguous tract within itself anywhere in east of Mississippi is
Mm-hmm.
incredibly unique. It's very uncommon to find properties that are 7,500 acres. So that's a big plus. That's a real unique asset. Then to be on the water and to have the lodge. And what's interesting is that there's a farm adjacent to this property. I think the total acreage of the field is somewhere. I want to say it's 30 or 40,000 acres.
Oh, wow.
A huge farm, and it's one big field, and it is the largest farm on the east of Mississippi. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. I'll have to look it up here in a minute, but so this whole area is very rural, very isolated. A lot of growth happened in this area, a lot of demand, and so it's a really unique asset. But you have a very flexible seller that's willing to try something different, which is what we're doing with Outside.
Yep.
And Slade and I are working on a deal in Alabama, same situation. You got to have a seller that's willing to say, okay, I'll try this. And so on this particular property, one of the things that really attracts me to this property and my vision for this property is it's in North Carolina. It's where I'm from. It's in my backyard. I spend a lot of time in Carteret County, North Carolina. My wife and I split our time between Richmond, Virginia, and Carteret County. So it's North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, RTP. You've got Mark Yusko over in Chapel Hill, Morgan Creek Capital, big into Web3 and Web3 infrastructure investing, big Bitcoin advocate. He actually got me involved in on-chain monkeys, which we should do another. We'll talk about that in another episode.
Sure.
It'll be a good subject. You have him in RTP. You've got on Twitter. Sometimes you'll see people talk about Cryptolina.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of interest in North Carolina around blockchain, real world assets, Web3, digital assets, and you have the North Carolina Blockchain Initiative, which is an organization that I've been following and paying attention to. I'm not connected to them in any way. Would love to be. Would love to work with them. They've done a lot of positive in North Carolina. So I really see North Carolina becoming a very strategic player globally
Mm-hmm.
in the digitization of real world assets.
And this property is just located there.
It's a couple hours from Raleigh, and it's in the neighborhood.
Yep.
And so so my vision, the vision for this property is to continue monetizing the carbon revenue, of course, to essentially flow that back to the token holders in the form of something of a dividend payment. Once we finalize the deal and close on it and everything. The other vision for the property is we bought a tiny home manufacturer in North Carolina, Campfire Homes. We'll have Mark Ralston on another episode here soon, where we'll talk more about the vision behind Campfire Homes and what we're doing. And so that's in Lenore, North Carolina, Campfire Homes. We're going to tokenize a tiny home company, Outside Wheel. And so we're bringing together the recreation elements, the biodiversity ecosystem elements, all into one place. But I really would love to see this property become a real world asset, digital asset event venue. I think it's ripe for that. It's there's something really cool about being able to fly into New Bern, North Carolina, small airport but connected to Charlotte, which is a global international hub for airports, and fly into New Bern, North Carolina. Go to Morehead City, get on a boat, and then take the boat around the sound and up the river, get off at the dock with your bags, and go to a real world asset conference in North Carolina and stay in a tiny home or stay in a 16-bedroom lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And have a setting where you have a big fireplace, think rustic, sun porch, rustic enclosed porch, that has a fireplace and big commercial cooking area and commercial dining area, to where you can have these intimate events
Mm-hmm.
and gatherings and bring people together that all have a common interest from all over the world.
Yep.
And bring them to Carteret County, North Carolina, in partnership with Mark Yusko, North Carolina Blockchain Initiative, etc. So that opportunity in the future really excites me, and to be able to do it there and build relationships and ride side by side ATVs or horses or whatever it may be, or go
Yep.
to the beach, or boat ride, different things. So much there that could be done with that particular property.
Yeah. Interesting.
On top of preserving it and making sure it stays the way it is.
That's right. That's right. So protecting it and ensuring the state of stays the way it does, other than putting some tiny homes on it, which are going to be low impact. And we have a company that we're working with, Outside Energy, that's involved in niche renewable energy opportunities and different things. And so we can put solar on the property and use that to essentially set all them up off grid. Which we're working on doing with Campfire Homes. And so just so much we can do there, and on top of that, protect the property.
So you've talked a little bit about some of the revenue streams and also about the carbon sequestration. A lot of people say, well, can you make money sequestering carbon? Can you make money off of these conservation projects, things like that? Talk a little bit about that. How does this property generate revenue for the token holders, that they get a return on their token investment?
So right now, today, the property is generating annual revenue in the form of six figures.
Okay.
Today,
Yep.
without doing anything. And so from day one up on closing, we can essentially generate that as a dividend back to token holders. The beautiful thing about having an existing carbon sequestration deal on a property is that you can expand it very easily, because you already have one. It's already been set up, so you can expand it. And so essentially, this carbon deal is only on a partial footprint of the property, not the entire footprint. And so the other opportunity that I see coming in the future is the opportunity to capture not just the carbon credit value, but the conservation credit and biodiversity credit value combined with carbon credit value. And so, like this week over in London, there was a biodiversity conference, a 2-day conference all about corporate biodiversity investing. And so, as the carbon market is going through growth cycles and growth challenges and different things here recently, I think, and I said this a couple of years ago, and I still believe it to be true, because I'm starting to see this, the biodiversity marketplace, for unique assets that have streams, waterfront, marshes, native habitat, native plants, unique places, that's going to increase in demand in this corporate marketplace. So essentially, I'll pick on Microsoft, for example. You've got Microsoft out here buying carbon credits the past few years. But I've had this conversation with some of the people at Microsoft. I see an opportunity for Microsoft to essentially work with them and sell them biodiversity credits in the future. And I think it's going to be a lot more to that, because then, instead of growing, having a 7,000 acres of pine monoculture, which a monoculture is where everything is the same.
Yeah.
You just have loblolly pines or slash pines planted in rows. They're sequestering carbon, and they're essentially capturing that carbon and storing that in the ground and into wood. But I think what's going to become more important are those hardwood bottomlands and those native longleaf pine plantations, those native longleaf pine stands, things of that nature. And so when you have an opportunity somewhere for a property that has been managed by corporate timberland companies like TMOs and whatnot, and nothing wrong with that. That's part of the past and the history. But when you have a property that's been managed by corporate timberland companies and corporate mill operators, and now you've got 7,000 acres of loblolly pines, and to be able to take that property over time, protect it, do everything we're talking about, but also to convert it back to native habitat, convert it back to longleaf pine. That to me is where the game is. That's the play right there, because that's when you start to get into those biodiversity credit opportunities.
Interesting, very interesting.
To sell to those corporate buyers.
Yep, and you're saying, especially we see here in Alabama, a lot of in the Southeast in general, most of that is turned into that monoculture, just pine plantations. So these tracts are getting more rare.
Yeah, Slade, you and I've both seen that. Me growing up in North Carolina and living in Virginia, and you growing up in Alabama and traveling all over the South like myself. I mean, it's They originally were not lobby pine. They originally were hardwood bottomlands and or longleaf pine. And I read there's some great books about longleaf pines. I've done a lot of read about it. I'm a big fan of longleaf pine. It's a tree that built the South. And so, in fact, before outside was outside, it was actually called Longleaf Conservation Capital for that reason, for my love of longleaf pines. And so I read somewhere one time that a squirrel could run from Virginia all the way to the coast of Alabama or the coast of Mississippi, from longleaf pine to longleaf pine, and never touch the ground. And so, you can't do that today, unfortunately.
So was that the native pine tree that was there like 300 years ago, kind of thing? Or
Yep.
okay.
Yep. In fact, that was the tree that built the South, and that was a tree that also built the Northeast.
Interesting.
And so there's a huge history around longleaf pines in the South, and essentially taking those trees and harvesting those trees, cutting them, and then um, what happened was they're traditionally known as a fairly slow growing tree compared to a lot of the
Okay.
other species that exist, and so it takes a little bit more effort to restore a longleaf pine. It's a whole lot easier to stick a slash pine in the ground or loblolly pine in the ground and grow a 16, 20-inch pine tree for pine pulp timber production, saw timber pulp timber production than it is a longleaf pine. And but yeah, so essentially, like when a lot of your mills up in the Northeast that are 100 years old, 150 years old, um, were built. A lot of times those mills are when they're demolished, there's companies and organizations that go in and essentially salvage those heart pine, heart beam timber out of them, is what you
Okay.
hear it called. So when you hear people talk about heart pine, that's what we're talking about.
So is the longleaf? Just a little side note on the longleaf because I don't know much about it. Is it a harder pine, or what is there advantage to that pine versus what was replaced with?
Slower growing, so it's a denser pine.
Okay. Yeah.
Hence the heart pine terminology there. But also too, the thing about a longleaf pine is it was the ecosystem around it. It had a what not a fire dependent ecosystem, but a fire positive ecosystem built around it to where essentially longleaf pine responds very well to prescribed fire.
Okay.
And so, like in the South, a lot of times we traditionally had a lot of lightning storms
Mm-hmm.
and different things in the South that would essentially ignite these wildfires. And so, essentially, what that would do is that would burn off a lot of that competing vegetation,
Gotcha. Okay.
and allow those longleaf pine to grow up and above what is that competing vegetation, and then to essentially rise above that understory.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what was lost, after those trees were harvested, was that management regime. And so you're seeing a tremendous the Longleaf Pine Alliance has done a wonderful job of restoring a lot of these ecosystems and pine stands, and protecting the few that remain as well. And so prescribed fire is an integral part of that management regime to restore those species. So one of the opportunities I see, one of the really, when you think about longleaf pine restoration, you're not thinking of a couple of years. You're not even
Yeah.
thinking 10 years. You're thinking 25 years plus.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because it's
And
so
so
slow
you're
growing.
thinking. You're thinking about things that will outlive you.
Yeah.
A management regime that will outlive you and into generations in the future. And so like Carteret County, Lukens Island, I just see a tremendous opportunity there to restore it back in a native habitat, which is longleaf pine. And so that's when and you do that incrementally.
Yeah.
You do that over a 25-year period. You take a little bit of this timber out, which is the loblolly pine, restore longleaf pine, and
Yep.
it's a grid that you're working through there. So tremendous opportunity on this particular property for some long-term biodiversity restoration, which leads into biodiversity credit opportunities to sell into a corporate global market, on top of the revenue opportunities, the event venue opportunities I mentioned, etc.
What kind of challenges do you? And I don't want to dominate the question here, Slade. If you got questions, just jump in. But what kind of challenges on this particular property with reestablishing the biodiverse and the longleaf pine? Like, are there invasive species that you're going to be having to deal with? Is there disease that you're going to having to deal with? What talk about if there's some challenges on reestablishing the diverse culture environment there that you're looking at?
On this particular property, I think your greatest challenges, a lot of times are essentially markets. Sometimes,
Okay.
timber markets.
Yeah.
Um, that's a challenge. That can be a challenge. Trying to balance a balance between something that's aesthetically appeasing, that's going to appeal to the conservation community, and something that is going to allow you to go in there and strategically, low impact strategies, harvest timber
Hmm.
to restore native habitat. That's always a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It's just because you're dealing with a lot of equipment, trucks, and different things. And the cool thing is that we can do this incrementally, so we can essentially tap into that event venue revenue, the carbon credit flowing revenue, also to the timber revenue. We
Hmm.
can essentially extract that as well, and then roll that back into the longleaf pine restoration. So, challenges on this particular property. It can be wet at times. You
Yeah.
can have some hurricanes here on the coast. Not really. In terms of that, really, I think your biggest one is really just the impact of the activity itself. That's
Hmm.
really the biggest one. And I have spent a lot of time in the years past working around that issue and trying to
Interesting.
deal with it and with it.
Yeah. That's where you start using horses, maybe.
Well, not yeah, maybe in the mountains. I know that's pretty predominant, but when you're trying to, the problem, when I was talking about the markets, one of the problems is the markets in the South are set up for high production, high
Yeah.
volume production of timber production, and so there's just not a efficient way to use horses, for example,
Gotcha. Yeah.
to log southern pine timberland and haul it to the mill. It just
Hmm.
doesn't pay. It doesn't. The numbers
Yeah.
don't work.
Yeah.
Believe me, I've tried it.
Yeah.
I've tried it with rubber track low impact machines, and the numbers just don't work. And so that's the challenge you're trying to work around. And so, but there's ways to do that, and
Yeah.
you just got to be patient.
Yeah. I gotcha.
What all kind of events are you imagine? I mean, are you thinking like opening it up to even like wedding venues and stuff like that, or more so just like stuff that we're that you'd be planning yourself,
Yeah,
or
I think the wedding event venue business. When we first started the company in 2019, we actually looked at a wedding event venue in Southwest Virginia, and we actually put it under contract and looked real hard at it. And what I learned about the wedding event venue business is that it's incredibly hands on.
Hmm.
It's intensive. You gotta be there during the event. You got a lot of it's for the people that do that, great, congratulations. But this is not the outside model, the wedding event venue business, unless there's an operator there that can run it, and nobody needs to worry about it. So I think, Slade, I think the opportunity here is a corporate retreat, working with like I'll use, for example, a Google, Microsoft, Apple, one of those corporate entities where you can say, okay, here's a corporate venue that we can work together on. But oh, by the way, there's over 7,000 acres over here of carbon and biodiversity credits that we can work on together too. And so to be able to bring that corporate partner to that corporate event venue that we're working with them on, and host meetings and host customers and clients to say, oh, by the way, we're offsetting our carbon and biodiversity footprint for this event and us as a company, and you're looking at the trees that are doing it, and you're looking at the plants that are doing it,
yeah,
and you're
that's
looking
cool.
at the marsh that is doing it. And so to essentially bring that all together in one place, I think is really powerful. In fact, we're working on a property. I'll talk about this in more detail in another episode, in Western North Carolina, the Brewer Hill property with the Brewer Hill Furniture family. And so there's a Google data center there in Lenore, North Carolina. And one of the things we're working on doing is setting up tiny homes to where we can essentially attract Google employees to stay in those tiny homes and do exactly what I just described.
Hmm.
Use the surrounding woodland and forest land and the land to essentially uh, tie back into biodiversity and carbon opportunities with Google or whomever it may be. So I think that's a very feasible strategy.
Interesting. Well, that's a lot of good content there, Aaron. If people want to know more information about this property, this specific property, or want to ask you questions, how can they get in touch with you? How can they
Yep,
dig into this
yep.
a little bit more?
So we can put some links into the podcast, I believe,
Yeah.
into the description. Probably the easiest way. We probably should have that for all of us anyway, as it is. But getoutside.com, www.getoutsyd.com is by far the best one. We're very active on Twitter. It's at Get Outside on Twitter, or at NC Longleaf. I'm NC Longleaf on
Yeah.
Twitter. Um, those are by far some of the better ways. We have a Instagram page. We're not too active with it. We're getting ready to start up a TikTok page, and that's going to be centered around this podcast as well. And so, yeah, the website, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn personally.
Okay.
Aaron Bumgarner on LinkedIn, AARON BUMGARNER. And so those are the best ways.
Good. Slade, any more questions for Aaron before we wrap this up?
I think that covered good. I'm excited about this one. That's an incredible property.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing place. I'd come down there with my boys and run some four-wheelers maybe. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Aaron, for telling us about Lukens Island. And that'll wrap up our episode for today. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.